Hello, everyone. My name is Sylvia Von Aulock. I'm the Executive Director at Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. So happy you can join us this evening at what's to be, I think, a very, very exciting webinar on accessory dwelling units. We are so lucky that we have 7 different presenters tonight. They'll be introduced by James Vail in a few minutes. And for me, I'm just going to go over some ground rules and just really welcome you all. One of the things I encourage you to do, we're doing a short sort of info, just trying to find out who you are. So one of the questions on your screen right now should be, what type of attendee are you? Whether you're a homeowner looking to build an ADU, etc. Please take your mouse and fill that out so we know who you are. So yeah, let's get on. One of the first things I want to do is I want to thank New Hampshire AARP, especially Todd Fahey, who's the executive director there. He's joining us tonight, and he is also, thankfully, the funder of this fantastic evening. And this is New Hampshire AARP is why we can bring this to you tonight. We are covering a lot of information. So if you're thinking, oh my golly, how am I going to understand all of this? Don't worry. One, we have a question and answer session at the end, but we're also going to be putting this up on YouTube. We're videoing this as we speak. And so you can brush back and look back later on and find out just exactly what we were doing and look at it a second or third time. Also, we would like to encourage you all to use the Q&A. You can't use the chat. Only our panelists are internally using chat, but you're allowed to use the Q&A. And oh, I'm seeing some questions already. So please, yes, you'll be able to share this presentation, but it'll also be on YouTube, and we will be putting that on our website. That's the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission website. Now let's look and see my time. I have 2 more minutes. If you have issues with the sound, anything like that, please let me know through the Q&A. And so far, Tammy, Cam is having an issue. He can only get in as an attendee and not as a panelist. So maybe you can give him a special permission.
Yes, I just sent him a new email link, so hopefully that'll work. If not, I will find a workaround.
All right, thanks, Tammy. All right, and I will be monitoring the Q&A. So later on, as we get questions, and we're going to find time at the end to review these questions, I'll be reviewing those and asking our panelists at the end to address those questions. So again, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to James Vail.
Hi, everybody. This is James here. Thank you for joining Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission for today's virtual workshop on how to do an ADU. This workshop is designed to help you understand what is required for creating an accessory dwelling unit in your own home, whether you have a home today or, are planning for the future. I want to take a moment for a special acknowledgement of AARP New Hampshire. The financial support of AARP New Hampshire made today's workshop possible. Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission takes pride in its partnership with AARP New Hampshire and the opportunity it provides to promote age-friendly housing and mobility solutions throughout the state. Today we're going to hear from several speakers working to support the development of accessory dwelling units in northern New England. The workshop will share key information on accessory dwelling unit regulations and how ADUs are designed, constructed, and financed. Each speaker during this workshop represents an important step in the process of developing an ADU. Today's agenda will go through each of the speakers that I had just mentioned. At the end of each speaker will take a couple minutes for their presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we'll field questions submitted in the webinar Q&A box. If you have questions during any of the speaker presentations, put them into the Q&A box at any time, and we will either respond by text or pose the question live to the speakers. Before we hear from our panelist speakers, I want to take a moment to share why ADUs are such an important housing solution. Each of our stories are different, but as a collective, our story is one of shrinking households, yet growing homes. Today, more than 1/4 of all households are one-person households, yet only 15% of homes have less than 2 bedrooms. There's a clear mismatch between housing need and its use. Households are getting smaller, yet homes are growing larger. This is a trend that has been decades in the making as baby boomers have aged through child rearing and into retirement. Older people, now often with an empty nest, have less need for their large homes and a greater need for mobility accommodations. How is this affecting people? Nearly 1 in 4 adults aged 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated, which can have terrible ramifications for seniors. The CDC finds social isolation is linked to a 50% increase in the risk of serious health conditions such as dementia. And at the same time, millennials have been shut out of home ownership, contributing to a major gap in wealth creation compared to their parents' generation. ADUs stand poised to bring generations together. Each underoccupied home is an opportunity to bring playful children together with lonely seniors. Each abandoned swing set represents a chance to repurpose a tired, overgrown lawn into an accessible backyard cottage capable of supplementing individuals on a fixed income or meeting the needs of persons with mobility limits. Each empty nester who is offered a viable way to downsize in their neighborhood also represents a home freed up for a young family. These solutions are not exclusive of one another. They are codependent and offer social, economic, and health benefits that go far beyond the issue of housing itself. And so with that, I would like to introduce our first panel speaker today, Cam Prolman. Cam joined Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission as an intern in 2015 and was promoted to regional planner in 2018. As a native Granite Stater, he earned his bachelor's in community and environmental planning and his master's at public administration from the University of New Hampshire. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cam.
Thank you, James. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As James mentioned, my name is Cameron. I'm going to share my slides. All right. So I'm going to be talking about common zoning regulations and just basically what to look for in your own community if you're interested in building an ADU on your property. So you want to build an ADU. There's a couple things you're going to want to understand. The first being your lot, the property in which where your home is located. You're going to want to understand the local zoning regulations in your town and just generally who to talk to in your town and possibly what professionals you'll need to talk to. So know your lot. If you don't already have a good idea of kind of the layout of your lot, a good way to start is to locate it on your community's GIS web viewer, or just give a call to your local building department or stop in at your town office. They'll help you out, but a good starting point is to check out the GIS web map. This is what I did right here. This is my lot actually. So you want to get a good understanding of the kind of physical characteristics of your lot. Is it nearby any water? How far is it? How far is your unit from the abutting property lines or the road? You're going to want to get to know your local regulations. So first thing you might want to do is just to Google your town's zoning ordinance, or stop in the town office. So this is an example of a community in our region. And so you can see here, there is a specific section on accessory dwelling units. There are other sections that will likely pertain to building an ADU on your property, but this is a good place to start. So what do you even want to look for in these, in your zoning ordinance? So the first question you might want to ask is, can you build an ADU in the zone in which your property resides? So in some communities, ADUs are not allowed in, let's say, a commercial zone, but are permitted with a special exception in a town's single-family residential zone, or permitted by right in some other zone. So just have a good idea of where you're located within your zoning district. You want to understand what the maximum square footage or the maximum floor area is that is allowed for an ADU. So whether that's measured as a static square footage number or a percentage of the floor area of the primary residence. You want to know if there's going to be a parking requirement for the ADU. In most cases, communities do require at least adequate parking for the new unit. Will you need to pay an impact fee for your ADU? So some communities require an impact fee payment for an ADU to help with the cost of additional community resources that are a result of the construction of the unit. And really the best way to kind of figure all this out is to call someone in your town, get a good understanding if you even have to pay for one, and what it means and how much it may cost you. Can the ADU be detached from the primary house, or does it need to be attached? In most cases in our region, ADUs are going to be required to be attached to the primary home, although that's not always the case. What is the maximum bedroom allowance? Again, most communities in our region allow for a maximum of 2 bedrooms. What are the setbacks? You're going to want to look through the zoning ordinance for these. They're basically the distance. A structure can be either from the front of the property line, the side, of the back, or additionally, there's typically a setback for wetlands as well. Do you have adequate water supply and sanitary disposal? The property owner must demonstrate adequate water supply and sanitary disposal for an ADU. The owner may be required to have a new septic system designed and approved if the existing system does not meet the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Service standards for the house, including the addition of the ADU. And then lastly, do you, the owner, need to live on that property? Municipalities may require an owner occupancy on the property. This is a summary of the towns in the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission region for some of the regs that you'll need to look for. So for example, the maximum square footage or the floor area. So these range in our region from 750 maximum square feet to 1,000. Some communities do have an impact fee for an ADU. And as I mentioned, most communities only allow attached ADUs. However, the towns of Deerfield, Londonderry, and New Boston all allow for detached. And then some communities also have a max bedroom requirement for an ADU. So let's say you have some sort of a good understanding about your local regs, and you want to take a look at your lot again to see if it actually makes sense. So this is my lot, this is my house, this is the little gray part is my driveway. Let's say, as an example, you want to build an attached 750 square foot ADU. This is not to scale, by the way. And just for example's sake, parking would be required here. So is there enough space in your driveway? In my case, there probably isn't enough space, so you would have to figure out enough space where you could add an additional parking space. You're going to want to understand your setbacks. So for an example, the side and the front setback, and it looks like I'm meeting the criteria for both of those. And it also looks like there's no wetlands. However, that may not always be the case. So you also want to understand the process for going through about building an ADU. In some cases, all you need is an application. In other cases, you're going to have to be a bit more involved with your town. So the example on the right, on the left is for the town of Londonderry, which is a pretty simple building permit application, assuming you meet all of their criteria. But in many cases, you're going to have to go in front of different town boards, whether it's the zoning board, if an ADU is required via special exception, or you may have to get a conditional use permit, in which you would have to go in front of your planning board. And then some require a site plan, in which you would have to also go in front of the planning board in your town. But just know that you aren't alone in this process. Many towns have really capable staff who will walk you through this process. You can make an appointment with your town planner, local building official, or other appropriate town staff to help you through this process. I also wanted to note some really good advice from the New Hampshire Housing and Finance Authority's Homeowner's Guide to ADUs, which says that if there's any ambiguity in the ordinance that your conversations with municipal officials don't resolve fully, get their interpretation in writing, and also consider hiring a lawyer for guidance before drawing up your plans, or a professional builder who's had success in your community before. So that's all I had. I do want to mention that these slides will be available on our website, as well as other resources, like resources from New Hampshire Housing and Finance Authority. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to James. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cam, and that was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. We have Russ Collins. Russ Collins is going to talk to us about design and construction of an ADU. Russ is a business owner for Home Innovations Corp. And this Home Innovations Corp is an environmentally responsible design, build, remodeling company that specializes in energy efficient homes as well as accessory dwelling units. Russ has a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado and brings an understanding of the science of building with decades of practical experience to meet the highest standards of cost-effective construction methods. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to Russ.
All right. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. And to follow on what Cam was talking about, let's assume that you've gotten your zoning and underway and you're okay to go ahead. You need to verify that you've got a design that's going to work. And one of the first things is fire safety, as far as taking into account design constraints. Fire safety and egress. You want to make sure that you're not going to lose protection of your building while you modify it or add to it. You want to keep your smokes working. You want to design everything so it's going to stay protected. You've also got to verify that you've got proper egress designed for bedrooms. They've got to be able to get directly to the outside from any bedroom. Septic, Cam had mentioned the septic constraints. Typically, the septic designs for any house are maxed out with what you've got on the property. You generally will need to get a new septic design, but you do not have to put the actual septic in. The state merely wants to know that if their septic system does go into failure at some point in the future, that a new design is approvable for that lot. So you go ahead, get an approval for you get a new design, get it approved, and proceed on down the road. When you're designing, take into account the traffic flow from your existing dwelling into the new section. If it's, I mean, human traffic walking around, you don't want to adversely impact what you're doing in the existing house by being able to get in and out of the new one. You got to take into account parking, where Cam alluded to that. Where are you going to park? Do you have enough space? How are you going to get there when there's snow on the ground, when there's ice? What about the drainage of the property? How are you going to get rid of water? Are you going to have to snow blow? If you're snow blowing instead of plowing, are you going to be salting to get rid of ice and then blowing salt all over your shrubbery? There's a lot to think about, a lot of details. You want to take the time before you start building to go through all the permutations and how this is going to affect you. You don't want to get that 5 years down the road and say, geez, I wish I'd thought of that. So spend the time on the design. You also want to balance privacy and accessibility. People living in the in-law apartment at the accessory dwelling, they want to be private, but if it's family members, in-laws, or parents or something, or you're living there and they have your house, you want to be able to get back and forth and share the common areas, but privacy is a big issue too. So you've got to balance those with how you lay things out, where the accesses are, how doors are hung so that you can open a door and not be right in somebody's face, but they know you're coming. Should you have lockability between the units? There's a lot to consider there. Plan for the future as far as aging in place, not just mobility concerns with steps and trips and corners and, you know, being able to move around easily. Wide doorways, not only that, but the lighting, lighting during the day, lighting at night. Do you have sufficient light? Is the light glare free? Not too much light, but think it through. One of the main issues for aging in place isn't, people say, well, I'm not incapacitated. My family history isn't one of mobility issues. Well, what about the people that you'd like to be able to have come visit? As James had mentioned, socialization is a big deal. Make it so people can visit the people you care about, so that they can keep the social life alive. Windows and doors. Double hung windows are cheap, but they're hard to open if you're older and have to bend over to lift a heavy sash up. So casements are easier to use, but now you have to crank. Can your rotator cuff do that? So pick your doors and windows so that they can be operated readily by the people who are going to live there. Knobs versus lever handles, details like that. Think through all the details. Maintainability, cleaning and upkeep. You want to be able to have surfaces that are easily cleanable, easily sanitizable. Like butcher block counters are great, but if somebody has to scrub them to keep them sanitized, is it worth it? Laminates and quartz are easily cleaned. Granite requires periodic sealing. Is somebody going to do that? If you have crevices and cracks around because things weren't put together very well, workmanship issues, or say in the corner of a room, instead of you know where the wall meets the floor, mops have a trouble cleaning that. If that was a cove molding there or something, people, mop could sweep any stuff away. If you can design things so that they are readily cleaned, they will stay cleaner more easily without the people having to agonize over it as they get less and less able to clean it themselves. As far as construction, if let's say you're going into and opening up a space to reuse, to repurpose, you've got possibly load-bearing walls. Well, you got to think through the structural issues. You've also got connections probably within the walls, existing wiring. You've got to take that into account. If you're adding new, that's not as much of an issue. It's easier to accommodate. But you've got to think through what's there and go into it carefully. Sometimes exploratory work is necessary, especially when remodeling. The heating and ventilating and air conditioning. it's more and more getting to be an issue, especially in older homes, as we make the homes tighter and more energy efficient. We're making it so they're not breathing the same way that they did before. We need to be careful that we take into account what ventilation requirements there are to make sure that we have the right air changes per hour, the right, we need to maintain indoor air quality. We need to make sure that we're handling the moisture in the air responsibly so that we have the humidity levels correct for humans, but not so correct for mold. Electrical issues, where are you going to run the wiring? How are you going to get the plumbing into place? How is it going to drain into the existing system? Can we extend the existing HVAC and plumbing systems and electrical off existing boxes and drains, or do we need to have a pump up system or some other way to accommodate it? So on the least expensive end, if you can use everything that you've got and just extend it, that cuts the cost tremendously. If you have to go fresh new heating plant with separate air conditioning and new electrical service and put in a new septic system because you can't get it over to your existing or put a pump system in, you start jacking the costs. Back to insulation and air sealing, a lot of detailing. The more detailing you do to correctly insulate and seal against air transport losses, the better the comfort of the people living there and the less the long-term costs of operating that home. It pays dividends down the road. And permitting and inspections. I know that people don't want to spend, a lot of times they'd rather not spend the extra money for the permits. Hey, I don't want the government intrusion in my house. I don't want to have this be a trigger for the assessor to come through and make my taxes go up. But on the other hand, safety is a huge issue. The building inspectors are trained professionals. They know what they're doing. They've seen a lot of stuff they've seen a lot of things happen. They've been around the block. Their job is to work for us as the consumers. They're not it's not an evil government thing. Another aspect is insurability. If you didn't get a permit or didn't follow the rules and something bad does happen, somebody gets hurt, is your insurance company going to cover all that the same way as they would if you played by the rules? Also, there's the resource value of the inspector, the advice they can give you, the peace of mind that you're not going off the deep end here. So resale value is the last one. But anyway, get the permits, get the inspections, deal with a responsible contractor who's going to do that. If the contractor says, no, we don't need no stinking permits, get a different contractor. That's about it for me.
Before we move on, we had a specific question, and I thought it was worth taking a minute since we have saved some time between James, Cam, and myself, and I'm going to ask that question. And this is regarding the comments about septic systems. So I'm just curious about the homeowner and, designing and constructing a septic system. So the participant was unsure, or at least didn't feel that you could design or construct a septic system for anything but other than your own home. So as an accessory dwelling unit, that wouldn't be your own home. That would be a home for someone else. So it would be required to have a licensed designer installer. And I don't know if you can clarify any of that. I know for some communities, they require a licensed design, but not necessarily that to be installed unless the septic system fails. I talked with great length with the Wyndham building inspector about this. What are your thoughts, Russ?
You're correct that a licensed designer needs to design the system. The system has to be approved by the state, by state DES, as well as by the municipal officials. They typically look to the state for their approval. It's not something that a homeowner can just design on their own. That wouldn't be acceptable to either the state or to the town.
Excellent. Thanks,
You
Russ, for
don't have to
clarifying.
install it though. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Well, before I introduce our next speaker, I did want to do a little bit of a parlay, Russ, between the work you do and our next speaker's topic, which is financing for accessory dwelling units. And so I'm wondering, Russ, if you might be able to take a minute and just touch upon some of the things that are commonly requested by lenders from homeowners or the contractors directly when they're seeking funding or a loan or any kind of loan product, lending product to complete their accessory dwelling unit. Or any kind of construction for that matter. I know that kind of cuts across a couple different things, types of construction. So, you know, in your experience, have homeowners come to you with specific requests from their banks for design and construction products that they use to underwrite the project?
Mostly our clients are handling the financing separately and of themselves. But one thing we do get requested is they would like to see a very detailed contract draft for what specifically we're going to build. And I guess the perspective from the bank's direction is, what is this going to look like when all is said and done? So we need to have a very detailed view or picture of not just the design, but a detailed breakdown, not of costs, but of features that this property is going to have when it's all done, so they can gauge the value.
Great, thank you so much, Russ. And I think that you know is a great transition to introducing our next speaker here, Jamie Frederes. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, yes. So Jamie is responsible for the overall bank leadership at as Senior Vice President and Director of Residential Lending for Bar Harbor Bank and Trust. His leadership includes franchise growth, business line profitability of the residential lending division throughout the bank's footprint in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And Jamie comes to this webinar with over 20 years of experience in residential lending leadership at both regional and national lending institutions. He's especially skilled at developing successful process and training to provide the best products and customer service to those seeking home financing products. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie.
Okay. Let me take a second and share my screen. And okay. Thank you for the introduction, James, and it's a pleasure to follow Russ and Cam. And my goal today is just to kind of introduce options involved in financing the initial investment if you're moving forward with an ADU. You know, I'm putting this together. Probably could have taken up the whole time to talk about these different options. So this is not meant to be an in-depth dive into a particular way, but just as an overview of the different options that exist and some of the due diligence that would probably be necessary to explore some of the options. So let me jump right in here. So as we begin to look at this, you know, planning for this, there are a series of considerations with leveraging financing products, and some of them my predecessor speakers have talked about. In moving forward with a home ADU, and if your intent is to leverage the equity in your home in some form or fashion, the first question in doing your due diligence, does my home have the equity? this is probably a good time to ask that question. If you have not done home financing in the last 24, maybe even 36 months, you haven't had your home recently appraised, it's important to take a look at that. Home prices have been on a steady incline in most of the neighborhoods, especially in the New Hampshire space, but throughout many of the states in the United States. And so never before have we seen such an increase so quickly in people's equity positions in their homes. So determining if you have that equity available to you, this may be an easier time than not to take a look at that. And there are, one of the things I would caution you on is there's certainly a number of different websites out there, Zillow and Redfin, that will give you a quick indication of what your house is worth. Not using that as a sole determination, but taking a look at what equity position do you have in your house currently is going to be part of that decision process. Next question is, in determining if you're going to be using financing, is what financing do I currently have in place, terms and rates? Possibly over the last 24 months, you may have taken advantage of some of the historical low interest rates and refinanced a mortgage and locked in either a long-term low interest rate on a 30-year fixed, or possibly reduced down to pay your mortgage off earlier. Some of the things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes will involve, some of the options will involve possibly replacing that existing financing. And as rates continue to rise, and they have risen a little bit from their historic lows over the last 24 months, taking into consideration what financing you have in place and what that's going to do to your overall cash flow will be important. Whereas a current financing solution may fix the ADU problem, it's really important to take a look at what that impact is going to have in total with potentially replacing any existing financing that you have in place. I wasn't planning on going deep on zoning, and I was pleased to see that Cam went pretty deep on that and understanding the zoning. Especially with leveraging financing, there is going to be an appraisal typically done by a licensed New Hampshire appraiser. And they are also going to take a look at in determining the value of the marketable value of your home. If you're to go down that route, they're going to also be looking at the zoning. They're going to be looking at the highest and best use of the property and placing the marketable value based on that. We'll talk a little bit on a couple types of financing in a minute. But certainly Cam went deep on this, and he would be the person to spend a little more time in understanding the zoning and the highest best use of the property as it sits right now. Then underwriting guidelines, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the common belief with an ADU is that I'm going to rent it out, or I'm going to live in it and rent out my my current residence. Both on paper look like a great option, and certainly in most cases very doable. But how does that income translate into income to qualify for a mortgage? I will tell you, with the increased popularity of ADUs, both Fannie and Freddie, which are the major suppliers of mortgage money in America today, they both have underwriting guidelines in place to address it. However, they are a little bit restrictive on leveraging the income to help you qualify for a mortgage. And those parameters need to be reviewed prior to moving forward to understand that, based on this, will I be able to use the prospective income to help me qualify for any new financing to accomplish this goal? We're not talking about really building a two-family residence. It's taking a look at using an ADU as it sits on potentially a single family residence as it is today. So let's take a look at some of the product options out there. There are different types of mortgage products available. What I'm going to do is kind of go over the general categories, some of the pros and cons, and some of the considerations that you should be taking into account. Now, I will tell you this: it's been my experience and over all the years I've been doing this, as soon as you mention to friends and family that you're thinking about financing this, they're going to come up with the perfect financing product. You have to do what I did. This is the way to do it. And everyone's going to have an opinion on that. And that's great. But one of the most important things to remember is, that one scenario may have worked for that one scenario. And so we should not take that what my neighbor, my friend, or another person did is the right thing to do for me. There are a lot of variables in it. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the first of the products are purchase money first mortgages. You're going to hear me use that term first a few different times. So possibly you are looking to purchase a home and with an ADU for some of the various reasons we've talked about the motivation of being on this call. So purchase money mortgages are first mortgages, which means they're in first position. That's the primary financing on the house. And they allow you to go in and purchase that. They're fairly standard criteria for consideration. There are some limitations due to secondary guidelines. What does that mean? If the intent is to buy the home and with an ADU and then leverage prospective rental income from the ADU to help you qualify, that is a conversation you need to have with a mortgage professional up front because it's not a legal two-family, there may be restrictions in you qualifying for that. So really the question is, don't just assume that you can just leverage the prospective income from an ADU to help you qualify for the mortgage. Under certain circumstances you can, but please don't assume that. As far as the types of mortgages for purchases, there's a wide variety, not a lot of limitations on that. Any limitations that exist may just exist based on the zoning and the highest best use of the property with zoning requirements. So let's assume you already own the property and you're looking at converting it or building or constructing. So the next one is that because you own the property, you're talking about a series of like doing a refinance. You have equity in your home, possibly you've paid off the mortgage. You may have a very small balance on your current mortgage. And doing a cash out refinance, it's a first position mortgage. Again, I use the word first position. What I'm talking about there is that in completing this refinance, it would be the first loan on the title of your property. So that it's designed to potentially pay off an existing mortgage. Or if you have a home equity line of credit, that is meant to be subordinated behind it, so it's in first position. Those first position mortgages will give you the best interest rates and will also give you the longest term of stability with those interest rates. But keep in mind, as you're looking at a cash out refinance, it's designed to pay off the existing first mortgage. So as we talked about earlier, what is the existing terms? Rates have creeped up a little bit, and if you've got a very low interest rate on your existing mortgage and you want to do a cash out refinance, having full understanding of what the new payment would be with the increase in the mortgage and potentially the increase in interest rate would be an important discussion. And then the terms would be based on the remaining equity. What do I mean by that? The terms of that mortgage, how much you can take out, will be depending on the amount of equity in your home. So the higher your loan balance to the amount of the value of your home, those interest rates will rise as the perceived risk of being exposed in the house by a lender will rise as well. Once again, this is a good time to take a look at these options because home values have I won't say have never been higher, but certainly in most of our times of home ownership, they're at all-time highs right now. So leveraging that equity is a good time. Construction renovation first mortgage products. James and Cam had a brief discussion about what a bank may need from a contractor. Well, refinance and also purchase mortgages, there are products out there that will allow you to acquire or refinance the mortgages, and then in conjunction with an agreed upon construction contract with the general contractor, will allow for the disbursement schedule to be paid to that contractor or a series of contractors to complete the the ADU conversion or the construction of an ADU. And this is a popular product set that's used quite frequently. We do a lot of them at our bank, where we can finance the construction. Once again, a lot of the homework Russ had talked about in design and layout and permitting should be done prior to going into this, but certainly understanding that those options exist are important. This, once again, will pay off an existing mortgage. The other benefit from this is that an appraiser can go out and give a value and after approved value. So they'll value the home based on what it would be after the ADU was created, which in some circumstances may create lendable equity for you to complete the project. And then lastly, a series of the home equity lines of credit. These are a popular alternative where maybe you don't want to do a first mortgage, or you have a very low first rate mortgage, and you just want to access the home equity, the equity in your home. And you can do this through traditional home equity lines of credit or home equity loan, although home equity loans are not as popular as the home equity line of credits. Understand that those terms are variable. They won't pay off the first mortgage, and they'll go into a second position. And this may give you basically a line of credit for you to do the work that's necessary to achieve the goal of either creating an ADU through a conversion of existing structures on the property, or also building a new one in there. Once again, equity dependent and certainly an option. And then lastly, the reverse mortgage option. I will tell you, reverse mortgages have had their ups and downs in regards to popularity, but they are an option out there. My parents actually did one just recently on a home purchase with a reverse mortgage. We don't offer them directly, but there are certainly a number of providers that do. And once again, they should be considered if it suits your needs. So to kind of wrap it up a little bit here, talk a little bit about what you should know. The first thing to know is there is no one right way. This presentation would have been one slide if there was one way to do this. And once again, I kind of talked about everyone will have an opinion on how to do it, but it's through the research and then the people you're communicating with, the professionals who understand your project, your home, your personal financial situation, will make strong recommendations to you based on that specific situation. You know, like homes, every situation is different. And that's why it's important to have a general understanding of the options so that you can narrow it down to your right way that'll fit your need. What worked for a friend, what worked for a family member may not work for you. It doesn't mean that any particular financing is bad. It's just that, you know, didn't apply to the situation that you're dealing with. And lastly, meet with a professional mortgage loan officer to discuss your options. This is important, and there are many of them out there. They'll be able to answer the questions, make the recommendations, so that you have an understanding before you go down and commit to this project. That if you want to leverage financing or the equity in your current home, that there are avenues that can be done economically and fundamentally sound, so that you can enjoy that for a very long period of time. So I will wrap that up right there. So I'm probably going to get the hook in a minute.
Jamie, that was wonderful, and I do want to pose a question to you before we move on, and unless Sylvia, looks like maybe you have a question, I'll defer to you.
We have several specifically about financing. So let me just pick this one to start. How does the cost of an ADU compare to the increased property value? And will it typically increase the property value as much as the cost of the ADU?
Boy, you're going to hate my answer. Once again, there's no one right way to do that. It is so when an appraiser goes out to determine the ADUs, what they're looking to do is they're looking to, in the neighborhood surrounding yours, they're trying to find comparable homes that also have an ADU and what they're selling for in the last 3 to 6 months. So, you know, there's no blanket statement to say that's definitely going to go up in value. It's really going to depend on what other homes like yours. If you're in a colonial home right now and you want to put an ADU, they're going to go out and look for other colonial homes that have sold in the last 3 to 6 months that also have an ADU, and they're going to look anywhere from 1 to 3 of those to kind of bracket and what those values are. So if in the community that you live in, those homes are showing that they are increased values, that will give you a rough idea of what the impact is going to be. In regards to the cost to construct, Another hard one right now. I think Russ would probably agree with me. The cost to construct right now is it's higher than it has been in the last 24 months prior to this. Supply chain issues have raised lumber costs, and different costs of building materials. So if you had done this 24 months ago, maybe it would have been a little bit less costly to build if you were doing this in the next month or so. But they're being done, and the increased value in the homes is also taking into account some of the increased investment in constructing these.
We certainly have other questions, but I think to keep us moving, James, I'm thinking you're probably going to get that hook out for both me and Jamie. So I'm sending myself off to the side, and we'll get the rest of the questions after.
That was a great question. I love that one. And there's another one about fixer-upper loans, Jamie, that I definitely would love to pose during the Q&A session. So we'll circle back with you if you're
Okay.
willing to stick around.
I can stick around.
Great. All right. Well, we just heard from Jamie, and now we're going. Hopefully, people can see my screen. It may not be in. Oh, yes. Okay. We just heard from Jamie, and now we are going to hear from Tammy. Tammy's going to give us a couple of examples of ADUs in their different forms, and as an example of ADUs built within the New England area. And so briefly, I would like to introduce Tammy. Tammy joined Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission just recently this year. And she is originally from Buffalo, New York, spent a couple years living in beautiful western slopes of Colorado before moving here to the city of Manchester, New Hampshire in 2020. She has a bachelor's in urban and regional planning from the University of Buffalo and has a well-rounded planning background. And I would just like to say, Tammy's been an excellent addition to our team at the Planning Commission, very sharp, and we're very lucky to have her. So with that, Tammy, take it away.
Thank you, James. So now we'll take a look inside 3 great ADU examples right here in Southern New Hampshire. So we'll be seeing an attached ADU in Nashua, a detached ADU in Londonderry, and a renovation project here in Manchester. Our first example is an attached ADU in Nashua. This 720 square foot unit costs approximately $130,000 to build. As you can see on the left-hand side of the house here, the addition blends seamlessly into the main house and is consistent with the neighborhood character and all the houses around it. Also noteworthy, this unit has a front-facing entrance. That's not allowed in all of the towns, so you'll definitely want to check with your town to make sure if that's something that you can do or not. The homeowners, Brian and Mary, built this unit for their aging parents with health concerns. The interior boasts a full kitchen and a nice open concept living space. They said that the permit and build process was very easy, and the advice that they wanted to offer was to meet with all of your abutters with conceptual plans prior to initiating the project. That helped make their process go much smoother. This next example is a 1-bedroom detached ADU in Londonderry. The homeowner was looking to downsize but didn't want to sacrifice her storage space or this beautiful yard that she has. The main house is about 3,300 square feet. The town of Londonderry, as mentioned before, allows an ADU to be up to 40% of the square footage of the main dwelling unit. So this one comes in just under that at 1,275 square feet. And back in 2016, this cost $126,000 to construct. So here's a quick aerial view of the property. The main house is right here in the middle. There's a garage on the right, and here is the ADU on the left. In order to submit an application, the homeowner had to include their construction plans, their floor plan, their energy form, and a plot plan, as well as pay a $25 application fee. And she also paid a building permit fee, which is based on the cost of construction. So in Londonderry, that was $6 per 1,000, which totaled $781 for this project. Our last example is of a relatively small renovation here in Manchester. The homeowner created a small rental unit, which you can see highlighted in yellow up here, to bring in some extra income. So for this project, all they needed to do was add a kitchenette to the second-story living space, which only required electrical and plumbing work to be completed. The city also required 20-minute fire doors to the dwelling from the shared hallway. This space takes up 450 square feet within the existing single-family home and costs only $1,200 to renovate. In addition to the construction costs, the homeowner, David, excuse me, also paid $55 in application and permit fees. David advises to ask about the potential impact fees when doing your financial planning, which Cam mentioned earlier. For his project, the city collected impact fees for the fire and school districts, which were about $1,700. And David is able to rent out his fully furnished unit for $1,100 per month. So with that, I'd like to thank all of the homeowners for allowing us to share their stories with you all. And thank you all for coming to our presentation tonight.
Tammy, thank you so much for sharing these examples. This particular one is so rich and vibrant. The pictures, I get the feeling like I could live there. You know, I'm curious to hear from you. Did you find that the homeowners were enthusiastic to talk to you about their experiences? Would they do it again? Did they feel like they got a return on investment that made it worthwhile?
Yes, they did. Everybody had a great reason for doing it, whether it was to stay on the property that they loved so much, like in that second example, or in the first example, to take care of their family. It's a great way to have them close by, but again, like you guys all mentioned before, have that privacy. And then this one, it was a good investment. David is happy and he's able to make some money.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a great way to be able to stay in your home longer, or maybe not have to work so hard, right, to pay the bills. You get this big house and you're able to divvy up maybe some of the costs of utilities and other elements. Well,
Right.
thank you so much, Tammy. Any closing comments before we move on to the next presenter?
No, again, I just want to thank the homeowners for sharing their awesome stories with us.
Great. Well, we just heard from Tammy, and now we are going to hear from Paul McLaughlin. Paul McLaughlin's going to talk to us a little bit about probably one of the stickiest subjects when it comes to an ADU, and that's becoming a landlord. And I'll just digress for a minute and mention that in some of my research for this and outreach to homeowners interested in building ADUs, I found that the fear of becoming a landlord for those who want to rent was one of the biggest fears in going through the process of developing an ADU. And so Paul is the program director for home ownership at HomeTeamNH, which is associated with NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire, in case anybody is familiar with that organization. And Paul joined NeighborWorks / HomeTeam in 2011, and he manages all aspects of HomeTeam, which is a collaborative home ownership education and counseling program serving all of Southern New Hampshire from Nashua to the Lakes region. Paul himself is a licensed loan officer, a HUD certified home ownership counselor, and a participating member of the Mortgage Bankers and Brokers Association of New Hampshire. And so if ever you need counseling, Paul is going to be a great person to talk to. So with that, take it away, Paul.
Thanks, James. Not to mention well over 20 plus years in lending. But I digress, and let me see if I can share my screen. Awesome. Can everyone see my screen there?
You're looking great, Paul.
Okay, great. So again, talking about becoming a landlord, the rewards, risks, and responsibilities for owner occupants. And a lot of what we do is, hold on, I'm not moving. is, so as James said, we provide services on homeownership education and counseling throughout the southern region of New Hampshire to the lakes. So we are the program for those 3 nonprofit affordable housing developers, NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire, Catch Neighborhood Housing, and now Lakes Region Community Developers. I gotta change their logo. And we're here to provide our residents in New Hampshire with information and tools needed to make the best financial decisions related to purchasing, renting, and maintaining a home. So that pretty much covers anybody living anywhere. And then we provide home buyer education, financial capability training, landlord responsibility workshops, which of course we're talking about here. I will say our typical landlord workshop is at least a half a day, just on being a landlord issues. So as Jamie said, it's tough to get everything out there. Jamie, you did a great job though, answered all my questions. And post-purchase counseling, and then everybody's entitled to one-on-one coaching sessions where we dive more into that person's individual issues. We used to offer reverse mortgage counseling. So one thing to keep in mind, I'm glad Jamie talked about that, is, you know, there's a lot of good and bad out there with reverse mortgages. I caution everyone just to do your research. It's not always the worst option. It can allow you to age in place and have your family there with you, or even have a caregiver. So, you know, it's an option worth exploring, but one I will say, you are required to take some sort of counseling. We can certainly refer you to other resources in the state that provide that counseling. And so this is just a sample agenda of our typical seminar. And like I said, I want to say we might have added 2 hours to it, but a lot of it's about fair housing. And when you're talking owner occupied properties, which, you know, all ADUs should be, you know, you really have a little more leniency when it comes to fair housing laws, but things that you should still know. We do have, I will say, I'm not the one thing, I'm not as an attorney, but we do typically have attorneys coming into our workshops to talk about the fair housing laws, the landlord tenant laws, your lead paint laws. We've also had property managers talk about, you know, vetting resources. There's a lot out there to vet your possible tenants. And we have folks like Jamie coming in talking about financing. We have insurance folks, and sometimes we'll have even tax folks and investors to talk about that. So that is a huge workshop just on being a landlord, let alone all the other things you're talking about tonight. I did get some great information just listening in, you know, and I should have added more to my list, but there's so much more considerations that I didn't even consider. And having worked with folks for so long, I'm learning a lot tonight. So I'm glad I joined in early. So what, you know, again, why would you want to purchase a multifamily? You know, have a home that otherwise you could not afford. Again, I'm going to go back to Jamie. There could be lending restrictions with that, but if you meet their lending guidelines, again, it offers you a second source of income. And even if you can't use the income, if you can still afford the property, you can still use the income for personal use. So it's not a bad option either way. If you want a family or friend to live in one of your units, you know, we typically think grandparents, but I also, you know, talk to people about caregivers. Sometimes you want a living caregiver with you, but you don't want them necessarily living in your unit. Could be a steady income stream. There could be tax advantages. And again, location of the property. We always say location, 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 are all going to be things to consider. So pros of being a landlord. I should have started off, you know, one of the pros is living with your family. Also, it's one of the cons too, depending on how you look at it. So it could be great, it might not be, but can be a rewarding experience. You know, you learn some property management skills. Hopefully, I tell folks, you know, you're being a landlord. Hopefully you have some DIY skills, and, you know, otherwise you've got to contemplate those other costs that are going to come down the road for maintenance. One of the things, again, I'm going to go back to the reverse mortgage. When you go to reverse mortgage these days, you have to go through counseling to verify that you can pay the keep up of the maintenance, the taxes, and the insurance on the property. So again, something to keep in mind if that is your situation. It can be profitable. There is unlimited potential for success if you do it right. And, you know, growth of your equity and net worth. again, a lot depends, I think, down the road as more towns might loosen up restrictions and the market recognizes that type of unit, even more so like a 2-family in some sense. You know, hopefully that increases the value. But I always, again, like Jamie said, you never know if, you know, you're going to spend, you know, $50,000 to do something, and however, when, you know, it goes to appraise out, it's only worth 20. And then again, the intergenerational housing, having grandparents on site, having kids on site, siblings, whatever the need may be. And then our cons. People don't like the cons, but it's challenging. Obviously, I think that's one of the things I've learned tonight is, in addition to this, you have your lending regulations, you have your zoning regulations, you have your building and design and planning stage. I will say, so I know there was a question earlier about having a navigator. I personally, you know, suggest your builder, your lender are probably your 2 biggest resources going into something like that, and at least be able to guide you in the right direction. But there is a lot to research, and it definitely looks a little intimidating. But again, I think if you do it right, it can be rewarding. Again, unlimited potential for disaster, just like unlimited potential for success. You know, it's not a 9-to-5 job. Your tenant could call you at 10 o'clock at night, and, you know, you have to deal with it somehow. Collecting timely rent. Well, regardless if your tenant pays you rent or not, the bank wants your mortgage payment. So they don't care. And unfortunately, it could be tough if you have a poor tenant, you know, and not financially poor, well, maybe, but just a tenant who isn't a good tenant and they're not paying their rent on time, and you have to go through that eviction process. And that's never fun for anybody. And again, it can be hard work. So I want to talk about finding reliable tenants. Like I said, there's a lot of resources out there. But landlords should understand the basics of fair housing requirements. In other words, do not discriminate, treat all applicants the same across the board. I tell folks, you know, watch what you say, watch what you write. And, you know, it could be something very innocent. And again, especially in an ADU, you know, you once you start advertising and you start collecting rent and income from it, you've got to uphold these laws even more so. I mean, regardless, you should, but you know, just treat everyone the same. You want to watch about saying things about, you know, elderly or, you know, or grandparent, you know, this is perfect for grandma. That's, you know, as innocent as it sounds, it's an ad that could get you in trouble. Use the same application with all your applicants. Always ask for references for prior landlords, and always follow through and get their contacts. Have a short interview with the applicant. You know, document any decisions, especially when rejecting or accepting applicants. And establish a uniform standard for accepting your tenants. And be sure to verify their ability and willingness to pay rent. Now, willingness can be very subjective, obviously, but you know, you can ask for pay stubs, and you can pull their credit. And highly, I would recommend checking a criminal record too. Let them know you're going to do it. They have to approve of it. But and then the other thing I should put on there, which is public, is the sex offender registry, which is, you know, again, another thing that you just might want to do to make sure you're getting the best reliable tenant. And that's pretty much all I had. Like I said, a couple of times a year, we do offer our landlord responsibility seminar, and now we're kind of transitioning to this virtual platform. So keep an eye on our website, and, you know, hopefully we'll even promote through James and the folks here on anything coming up.
I just want to take a minute and say thank you, Paul, and note that when I bought my first house back in 2012, I went through the home buyer training seminars provided through organizations affiliated with Home Team now, and it was a huge benefit to me. And my first home was a 2-family home, and I became a landlord, which was a really scary experience. And there were times when I got those calls, right? I got a call at, you know, 11:30 at night one night. Hey, my wall is wet in my kitchen. What's going on?
Well, and regardless of the legalities of it, I mean, if it's, mom or grandma living in there, you still have to address it, probably even more so and quicker. So, you know, you still have to deal with it regardless of if it's an income property or not. I just think that's important. I loved Russ earlier. I was writing notes saying, you know, you don't want to have regrets 5 years down the road because you didn't plan correctly. I always say, yeah, but likely you're going to have regrets in 10 years because that's when you've really lived in the house and you say, Jesus, I wish I had done a bigger kitchen. But that's when you're going out to get your equity loans. But, you know, the bottom line is owner occupancy, the fair housing laws aren't as strict or, you know, to you. They're typically meant for folks that are, you know, four plus family properties. But definitely keep an eye out for our upcoming seminars. And like I said, James, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming out, and I hope you can stick around for Q&A in case we have any questions. And
Sure.
I will just note as one more testimonial that being a landlord was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I got to really know someone personally, and we built a friendship over time. And that's a wonderful thing. That was a person I would have never known if I hadn't owned a 2-family home. So
Awesome.
it can be a wonderful experience. So. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll bring up our next speaker. Our next speaker here is Todd Fahey. Todd Fahey is the state director for AARP New Hampshire, and he's going to talk to us about the future of legislation for ADUs in the Northeast. Todd is a New Hampshire native, and he just, you know, one of the things about AARP New Hampshire is that they have over 215,000 members, and the AARP New Hampshire chapter strives to enhance the quality of life for all as we age. Fahey is responsible for overall leadership at AARP New Hampshire, and I think he's going to tell us a little bit about his activities as the head of AARP New Hampshire. So Todd, take it away.
Hello, good evening, everybody. So that was a great introduction. I have to say, I am so impressed with all of the speakers this evening. Just an exceptional group of people and just incredible information. I'm going to try to distill everything down. So I have the good fortune and the bad fortune of trying to kind of close this out. So it's important, I think, as people are speaking, to explain like who you are and why you're doing it. So I have a real keen interest in ADUs for lots of reasons. Number one, my gosh, ADUs are a really important part of the potential housing solution to the housing problems that plague our younger residents and our older residents. So why AARP? We are focused on ADUs. We supported this existing legislation that permitted ADUs to happen as of right in New Hampshire. It used to be that you could get an accessory dwelling unit, but some towns they were limited usually to familial relationships. So you could not, in most cases, use an ADU for income purposes. So you could put an ADU, attach it to a single family unit, but it usually could be, say, 700 to 800 square feet. You had to establish that it was being constructed and was to be used by a family member. I know this because I sat on my town's zoning board of adjustment for like 12 years and heard many zoning cases relative to the creation of in-law units. They used to be called in-law units. Now they're called ADUs. So I share that with you because you got to know the history before you really know anything. The speakers before me were spectacular. I love all the, I'm going to try to take from each of them and try to weave together a vision for what this could mean for New Hampshire and what this could mean for any of us and all of us as we're trying to figure out how to solve the dual problems of a younger workforce unable to find and or afford housing in New Hampshire, an aging population that wants to stay in their homes as they age, and a fact that most people in New Hampshire do own their own homes. We are the second or third oldest state in the nation, depending upon which measure you look at. And what that means, if you put it all together, there's probably a lot of square footage that could be redeployed to create accessory dwelling units. So why do we need them? Well, we need them for housing. We need them for caregivers. We need them for the direct care workforce. So I'm going to share a quick slide that we have. We fielded a survey some time ago, and I'm trying to bring it right up here for you. I don't know if I can find my well, I'll bring it up in a minute. I'll just keep going here if I can get it up. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can bring my slide up. I'll come back to it. The bottom line is this. There's a possibility of creating from all this excess square footage in New Hampshire, accessory dwelling units. The current law requires, as of right, municipalities within New Hampshire to permit, subject to local regulation, units that are attached to or contained within existing structures. And when we talk about what that looks like, some towns do, as we saw, I think it was Tammy who did those great examples. Some municipalities will show you having detached dwellings, but in the usual case, those that are permitted expressly by law are attached or contained within. And so the big challenge is, and one of the thoughts is to use the existing law that we have, the ADU law that we have on the books, that was really a compromise between both parties, and it was the will of the legislators and the people of New Hampshire to create these units in New Hampshire and to permit people to have this housing option. So the real artistry, and I think the promise of this law, is how do we use this existing square footage in a way that benefits all of us individually, but benefits all of us collectively as well. So for instance, I mean, we have a ton of direct care workforce in New Hampshire. Any of you talk about aging in place and you talk about wanting to remain in your homes and communities, and that's true. And the great majority of people wish to remain in their homes and communities as they age. But in many cases, you need help to do that. And you have to have caregivers do that. And caregivers, in many cases, if they're paid, are not paid much money. So might there be a possibility of using some of this excess square footage, creating accessory dwelling units within homes or attached to homes that could be used to house caregivers? Maybe some of them work at a local nonprofit or one of the hospitals. The hospitals, as you know, anchor many of our communities now, whether we like it or that or not. The fact is we are very heavily dependent upon healthcare. Our hospitals are some of the best in the country. And when I say like it or not, that's just a reference to the fact that in many cases we've lost a manufacturing base that once was New Hampshire. I love the hospitals. I mean, we work with the Hospital Association all the time, but we have a pretty heavy reliance on healthcare. And so might we think about this whole group and others saying, could we even incentivize the creation of these accessory dwelling units, utilizing existing shells? Because I think some of the commentators and some of the speakers will talk about the cost of construction. So I think if you're making a value proposition here, you have to think about what is going to be the return on your investment. If you think about impact fees, you think about what it costs per square foot to construct one of these, even if you can find somebody to build, because right now materials are a little tougher to source because of supply chain issues, and labor sometimes is hard to come by as well. But I'm optimistic that we will find a solution and some of these things will work themselves out. But there is a possibility of thinking innovatively about how we use the excess space that exists in New Hampshire. There's a huge percentage of people who want to remain in their homes. There is a very big appetite for wanting to create ADUs in properties. So how do we do it in a way that is affordable, that is smart, and also that honors like what New Hampshire is? So somebody asked in the chat or in the Q&A, why not detached? And that comes up a lot. And some municipalities, as Tammy showed in her slides, do permit detached. Others don't want it because it changes or has the potential to change the character of a town or a place in New Hampshire. And I just want to remind people on the call that in many cases, you know, we are still a very divided nation. We're a divided country, and people have different views on what we should be doing in our towns. The fact of the matter is we have agreed that ADUs make sense. We have a law that says you can do them as a matter of right if attached to and contained within. Some towns have the ability to permit detached units as well. So the real promise of the law is it might be able to let people stay in their homes longer. It might be able to permit people to stay in their homes longer, actually have somebody in the property, maybe who is a caregiver themselves, maybe somebody who works at a facility. And so I bring up a much more different approach because I think we should think very holistically about what the challenges are. We have a workforce challenge in New Hampshire. We have business challenges because of workforce. We have a housing issue. And I think ADUs are one incredibly good way to start thinking about solving some of these problems. And I just want to leave you with this thought. If you stand on a bridge and look over at the bridge when we were all kind of going about pre-pandemic, and you see all of the traffic going back and forth under the bridge. Let's say it's one of our main highways, Route 93, 101, whatever it is, you know, any of the bridges in Manchester. The brilliance in many ways of the rideshare companies was somebody realized that there was a ton of unused capacity in those vehicles, in that energy that was going back and forth between the bridges. And I would submit to you that we have that same energy in existing underutilized or unused square footage in New Hampshire that we probably could, by using the ADU law and being maybe smart about giving municipalities permission, should they choose. This is still the Granite State, and it is still going to be a very local issue. But is there a possibility of doing a really clever, unique New Hampshire's type solution to our housing shortage by capitalizing on that existing square footage that's already built? And I come back to Tammy's comment about the 450 square foot unit that was done for $1,200. That was brilliant. And the others, I mean, were equally brilliant. But as many of the prior speakers talked about, there are challenges with, you know, siting. There's challenges with building costs. So, so my comments tonight are not to specifically talk about a piece of legislation that is imminent. It is my hope to work with stakeholders, and many probably on this call, to develop some legislation to see if we can get bipartisan support for it, you know, maybe in 2022, so that we can start really addressing this issue in a very humane, decent, safe, economical, and New Hampshire way. And I think the ADUs have a promise for that. So, James, those are my comments.
Thank you so much, Todd, and Sylvia. I defer to you if you have a comment before we move to the next. I want to give a little introduction for you too before we do our Q&A. So, but if you have a question for Todd before we move on, please do.
You know, Todd, we have talked quite a bit about the housing issues and accessory dwelling units, and also before that, tiny homes. And one of the questions, and I thought you'd be interested in this. So tiny homes, how might they someday, I don't know if you have any thoughts on legislation with tiny homes. Would they ever be able to be considered as ADUs? My thought on that was no, because they have different, you know, how they're built is differently. Are they to code? That may not always, you know, they may not be to code, but on the tiny homes, just wondering, because one of the participants said they're the most affordable option for both lower income renters and owners who need only to provide a parking pad and utility hookups. So just thought, I thought you might want to address the tiny home question.
Yeah, I mean, the tiny homes, I mean, in many cases, people are gravitating to the less is more mentality. So if you can put a tiny home on a slab, you don't have to even build a foundation. And incidentally, I mean, in my prior life, I practiced law for 21 years. I represented tons of landlords. I represented developers. I've developed property myself. So all of this is so near and dear to my heart. I could stay on with you all night. I love talking about these things. And this group is just an exceptional group. If they need any, if they wanted to come to holiday parties, I want you all to come to my house. And I have an ADU in it, which is vacant now, by the way. So it's not a pitch. I think the tiny homes are a possibility. As my recollection is that I think there was an issue in the legislation that people in New Hampshire didn't really want to see more rural areas with excess space dotted with tiny homes, right? So you might have a 10-acre parcel, and then you could have a bunch of tiny homes sited on it, and that might be a challenge. I mean, there's a lot of support nationwide for the conversion of garage space and all these other things over people's homes and garages that happen. That's happened in many places in many urban areas. I just don't know what the appetite will be in New Hampshire. And I would say to everybody, we're an independent lot here in New Hampshire, and people have very strong views. And I think no matter how we proceed in this realm, I think we need to acknowledge that our neighbors, and many of the prior commentators spoke about like talking to the neighbors beforehand, they have something to say about it. They can come to the hearings if you have to get approvals from the town, if you had to get a hearing, and it may be better just kind of diffuse that then, but not in the sense of diffusing it, just being a good neighbor. So I don't know. I mean, I guess in concept, it makes some sense. Is it ready fully for New Hampshire? I don't know. Not under current law, it's not.
All right. Yeah, tiny homes, complicated, mostly because of the building permit issues. So let's invite all the panelists back, and we're going to start with some regulatory type of questions first. And I'll invite, I see our time is at 6:27, and so we've been going at it for an hour and a half. I'm thinking, maybe 10 minutes for these questions. So, and I'll throw out some ones that are what I would consider maybe a little bit easier and less complex. It may be just a yes, no. And here's the first question that was up. If a home has an extra kitchen area, so 2 kitchens, but the unit does not have its own bathroom, and the person using the extra kitchen has to share the bathroom with the other side of the house, is it still an ADU? My answer was no, but anyone want to tackle that one?
I'll concur with you. I think you're correct. According to the law, an ADU is defined as having separate sleeping, food preparation, and sanitation facilities. And so if any one of those is shared, it's not separate, it's not an ADU.
That's what I thought, Russ. So we'll leave it at that. But
right.
I do encourage the participant who asked that to go to your own community and talk with the building inspector. Is that what you were thinking, Cam? I thought I heard you.
Yeah, I think, you've got to kind of look at ADUs as them being a separate living space entirely, apart from some shared amenities like a driveway or the piece of land that it's on, but to have each dweller using separate living spaces. So I would agree. I would say that no, that wouldn't be considered an ADU, but like you said, Sylvia, it's always good to go and talk to your local building official in your
Yes.
hometown.
All right, next question. And we touched base already on the detached units. Why are they frowned upon? My answer to that, and the participant is calling this a lost opportunity. I can't agree more. And I believe Todd agreed with me in that a community, often, you talk to most communities, they want to keep their community character. And part of that is to look like a single family home. And if a detached unit looks like a separate unit, then it looks like it's now two homes on one lot, which is why I believe sometimes detached units are frowned upon. Anyone want to add an additional thought to that?
I just wanted to get my slide on because I was embarrassed that I couldn't before, but just so when there's a webinar, being able to replay this, that people can actually have a look at it. Because this, I can speak to that quickly, but I'm sorry if you can just give me a second on this. We fielded a survey to 700 people age 45 and older about a year ago in New Hampshire. And this was their perception about ADUs. So this is statistically significant. These were AARP members and non-AARP members alike, and I wanted to make sure that people have a chance to look at this. I think it's very consistent with what all the speakers said, but I want to just put it out there as some data.
Yeah, I'm seeing your 86% support town ordinances that make it easier for property owners to create ADUs on their property. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So back to the detached. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right.
I would just jump in on this, Sylvia, and note that I think there's a huge opportunity in, it's not New Hampshire specific, but I think over maybe the next decade or two, we're going to start to see small units like ADUs start to be treated like automobiles, where we can automate and manufacture the process and bring the cost down. And so I think if we can get to a certain threshold where that can compete with site built construction, that we may see a pretty significant change in how people utilize their yards. We may see a lot more ADUs at some point in the future.
I hope so. We had a participant who asked specifically about Seabrook, if they allow ADUs, and while you all were chatting, I did what I would think any of our participants might do if they're interested in their community. I went to Seabrook's website. I found their zoning regulations under the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and I sort of dug in there a little bit and found their regulations, just like Cam showed on the example there. Their regulations for ADUs, and yes, Seabrook does allow them, but they only allow attached. So, and they have a variety of other regulations. So I invite you all, do a challenge for yourself. Look at your own community. Go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and look. What you're looking for right off the bat is your zoning ordinance. Maybe the first time you ever look at a zoning ordinance, it's not exactly an edge of your seat reading, but it will be good for homework as part of this webinar. All right, let's move on. Some reference type of questions. So here's one participant saying, since planning, siting, designing, and financing are also complex and time consuming, is there an ADU navigator resource? And if not, is there a nonprofit or legislation in the works to fund that kind of help? My response was there are a lot of ADU resources online. You have to sort of Google that, but does anyone know of a specific ADU navigator resource?
I don't know if it's a navigator. I mean, New Hampshire Housing Finance has got some great information on their website, and give credit where it's due. I mean, New Hampshire Housing Finance and Ben Frost and his team, they pushed the ADU law years ago. So we supported it, but Ben was the brains behind that. They've been a real leader on that, and I do think that there's some good information there to look at. But Cam, I do think. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Cam. As follow up, I think Todd makes a great point. Can you or Tammy add that link to our Q&A so that participants can go on the website to New Hampshire Housing Finance and look at their resources. Paul, did you have something?
Yeah, no, I agree. The internet can be our friend, and Google is my best advisor these days, unfortunately. However, like I said in my presentation, talk to the builders. I mean, somebody's going to have to build and design this for you. You know, interview them, talk to them. They're really going to be your partner throughout this process. I mean, I've found when I've had work done is, you know, the builder knew what was going on. I love Russ's comment about, you know, if they say you don't need permits, run. You know, I say things like that all the time is, you know, work with somebody who's qualified and they're going to know who to direct you to, even if they're not going to do it directly for you. They're going to be able to say, hey, this is your next step. This is who you have to go to in the town and, you know, guide you step by step, only then to be really simultaneously talking to your lender and getting the information on the financing as well. Once you know what the costs are going to be, you know, you really need to do that. So I think those are upfront, your two true navigators, but unfortunately, no, there's no one organization that just does that particularly.
I don't know who's missing from this discussion except maybe the insurance people. And I do think that there are insurance products out there that will more than cover any of these issues. But I mean, I think you've got everybody on the whole spectrum is covered here, unless we're missing somebody. Maybe the code enforcement people, maybe fire. They're the only ones really missing from the discussion, I think.
Yeah, well, there's so many experts and on specifics. Here's one. Can you get grants if you put an ADU in for an older parent? Now, my sister down in Florida, and we're going to jump a few states, down in St. Pete's, she's been working on tiny homes for vets and has gotten many grants and assistance with that program. But, you know, I think there's always a grant out there for someone, but you'd have to have something really special, I think. And I don't know if it would be for your own parent, but you know, it would have to be some sort of nonprofit maybe or something. Any thoughts?
Sylvia, I was going to send you back to New Hampshire Housing's website again. You know, great information on that. They do have some cash assistance programs. They do have a construction program. And I will say they're always in the works of trying to come up with new things. I know personally, in my organization, I have some funds from them for down payment assistance with folks. You know, obviously they have to go through the whole lending process and work with us and get their home buyer education. But I do know that they're always innovating and looking for new ways to, you know, support the community through the home buyer process. So I would say stay tuned, you know, and I know there's money coming into the state to help folks and help homeowners. So my hope is that there's some new programs, and this is a great idea. Actually, I'm going to share with them myself. So I appreciate it.
Right now, for our participants, I'm hoping, Tammy, if you could just confirm, a lot of our panelists are putting various websites and references on our chat. Does that go to panelists or is that going to everyone?
That is just going to the panelists, but we will make sure that all of the attendees get these links in a follow-up email.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That is awesome. So yeah, AARP has an accessory dwelling unit reference called the ABCs of ADUs, which is just sort of a fun thing to say. But there's so many more. So we'll make sure you all have that. I did put the housing and finance in the Q&A, so that went out to everyone. All right, let's look at, I think we have maybe just one or two more questions.
Sylvia, I would just jump on there and say that some of the chats are going to everybody. So sometimes it depends on who's been selected as the two. So many of things that have been shared in the last couple of minutes have gone out to the entire participant body. such as the resources from NIFA. And I just wanted to note that across the country, there are great examples of programs that offer grants for ADUs. California has one for home buyers where they offer $25,000 reimbursement for any homeowner that follows through with, will reimburse their pre-development costs. So if it costs $25,000 to go through the permitting approvals, architecture, engineering, they would cover all that cost. And so programs like that exist all over the country. Eugene, Oregon has a pre-approved ADU plan guidebook. And so you can pick from 6 pre-designed ADU units, and they'll stamp them right on the spot and send you out the door with your permitted plans, because they were designed by the city, reviewed by the city, approved by the city, and so they know those plans are good. And so I will throw a link up for the California reimbursement program and the Eugene, Oregon pre-approval program, just so people can see what some of these things look like.
Wow, that is really groovy. All right, just a couple of finance questions and then we're going to wrap up because I see we're losing some participants. So we did talk about some of the finance aspects earlier. Just a couple of very specific. Does Bar Harbor Bank offer a 201k renovation loan for ADUs?
Okay. It's actually a 203k loan, and that is a HUD-backed FHA product. We don't offer that product right now. We do offer the equivalent on a conventional portfolio loan. You know, it works almost identical, probably a few less hoops to jump through than a FHA streamlined 203k or a full HUD 203k.
Thank you. Good to know. And I'm imagining this is, you know, everyone has their own opinions, but one participant asked about, is it better to have a line of credit?
Oh, finance question. You know what? I hate to be evasive on the answer. Maybe it's really going to go back to your individual situations. I think I saw part of the question about interest rates as well on those. You know, lines of credit typically come with a variable interest rate. And so there's been a huge popularity towards long-term fixed rates right now because they're so low. And with the prospect of interest rates going up, some of the HELOC variable rates may rise with them. So if you're concerned about a fixed income approach, potentially looking at more of a 30-year fix versus a home equity may suit your needs. So once again, you know, I hate all my answers to be maybe. But it really is dependent on your individual criteria. And one other term that you'll hear a lot about is risk-based pricing. What I mean by that is no two transactions are alike. So depending on the risk characteristics, pricing may be better than others in there. So once again, a little bit of due diligence, asking a lot of questions, you'll be able to, you know, zero in on an interest rate program. So. And one misconception I'll say really quick here. Yes, Bar Harbor is the bank here. We're actually, our executive offices are in New Hampshire. We are New Hampshire based as well as the name is from Maine. And I'm also one of Todd's membership role at the AARP New Hampshire. So I get my magazines.
Just 2 more points. One comment, Maine allows tiny homes as ADUs. Interesting, as does many cities in California. So I'm wondering if that's a state allowance. I hadn't heard that, and we will look into that. And then a question for Todd. What were the incentives you were referring to regarding ADUs?
It wasn't specifically ADUs. There is some, if you're doing retrofitting to keep people in their homes and communities longer, there is some reimbursement, I think, through Medicaid for about $15,000 a year. I see Cam, hi Cam, is nodding in agreement. So maybe you have some familiarity with it, I think, and there might be some veterans benefits as well, but I'm not sure, given what we're talking about on scale and cost, that would be sufficient to create an ADU. However, you know, with Tammy's example, maybe it would be enough, you know, if it's the right type of retrofitting of a space that's existing. But I think it's Medicaid tied, that's one, but I would refer people to the New Hampshire Health and Human Services, the Division of Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services.
Well, I think that wraps up our time, and I just want to encourage participants to talk to your building inspector, your the town planner. There's just a lot of wealth of information at your town offices out there. They'll have a record, a public record of who's built, accessory dwelling units, and they can steer you in a right direction of who's building it and what your regulations are, all those sorts of things. I want to really thank all our panelists, again, our funder, AARP, my staff. This has been excellent, and I hope the conversation continues. So thank you so much for participating, and we'll see you soon.